Here's a question worth sitting with before we begin. Think about the last time life really tested you. A professional failure, a relationship that fractured, a moment where everything you planned hit a wall you didn't see coming. In that moment, what decided how you came through it? Not the event. The event was fixed. What decided everything was what happened inside you in response to it. The quality of your thinking, the steadiness of your principles, whether you had something internal solid enough to stand on when the external ground gave way. That's what Stoicism is actually about. Not enduring life with a grim face, not pretending difficulty doesn't hurt, but building something inside yourself so stable that the chaos outside genuinely loses its power over you. Not because you're untouched, because you're unshakable. The Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, were not sheltered academics theorizing about hardship from comfortable positions. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire through plagues, wars, and betrayal. Epictetus was enslaved for years and built his entire philosophy within those constraints. Seneca faced exile and eventually death at the hands of the emperor he served. These were people who tested these ideas against real adversity and found that they held. Today, we're going through 10 of the most practical Stoic principles, not as abstract philosophy, but as actual tools you can use the next time life asks something difficult from you. Stay with this completely. Each principle builds on the last, and the one you're tempted to skip is probably the one you need most. Let's begin. Imagine navigating open ocean without a compass. Every wave looks like the right direction. Every wind suggests a different course. You move constantly but arrive nowhere, and eventually the exhaustion of directionless motion becomes more devastating than any storm you'd face with a clear heading. That's what life feels like without a firm purpose. And Epictetus was direct about this. He said that difficulties reveal character, and that the more significant the difficulty, the more clearly it exposes whether you have something worth revealing. Purpose is not just motivational language, it's structural. It determines how you process setbacks, how you make decisions under pressure, and what you return to when everything else feels uncertain. But here's what most people get wrong about purpose. They think it's a destination, a specific job, a particular achievement, a status to reach. And those things can be part of it, but the Stoics understood purpose at a deeper level, as a commitment to certain values and a certain quality of character that guides every decision, not just the big ones. Who do you want to be? Not what do you want to have or achieve. Who do you want to be? What principles do you want to embody consistently, not just when it's convenient? What kind of person do you aspire to be in your relationships, your work, your private moments when nobody is watching? When you answer those questions honestly and build your purpose around the answers, something changes. Problems don't disappear, but they transform. The obstacle that would have stopped you becomes a challenge relevant to your purpose. The setback that would have derailed you becomes data about what needs adjusting. The difficulty becomes, as Marcus Aurelius famously put it, the way itself. Your purpose is your compass. You don't need perfect conditions to use a compass. You need it most precisely when conditions are worst. Find it, write it down, return to it when the weather changes. Everything you allow into your mental environment shapes what happens inside it. This is not a metaphor. It is a description of how the mind literally works. The quality of your thinking is determined in significant part by what you consistently expose that thinking to. The conversations you have, the content you consume, the people you spend time with, the narratives you accept about yourself and the world. None of these are neutral inputs. All of them are shaping the operating conditions of your mind. The Stoics took this seriously in a way that feels almost confrontational by modern standards. They believed that your inner world was your most valuable possession, and that it required active, deliberate protection. Not passive hope that good things would flow in automatically, but conscious curation of what you allowed access. Think about the analogy of a home. You lock your doors not because you're paranoid, but because you understand that your home is a space with value worth protecting. You don't leave the gate open and hope that only pleasant things wander through. You decide what enters. Your mind deserves the same deliberate management. And this goes beyond avoiding obviously toxic content. It extends to the quality of your internal conversation, the voice that narrates your experience, the stories you tell about what events mean and what you're capable of. These internal narratives are more powerful than almost anything external, and most people let them run entirely unchecked. Mindfulness is the Stoic tool for this. Not mindfulness as relaxation, as active observation. The ability to notice what thought is arising, to see it clearly before it becomes a behavior, and to choose whether to follow it or redirect. That capacity, the gap between thought and action, is where your actual freedom lives. Guard it, deliberately, consistently, as though something genuinely valuable depends on it, because it does. Here is the Stoic position on criticism, stated plainly. Other people's opinions of you are not within your control, and therefore, if you allow them to determine your inner state, you have handed control of your inner state to something you can never manage. That is not a position of strength, that is dependence. This doesn't mean criticism is useless. Sometimes it's the most useful thing available to you. Someone who sees you clearly, who cares about your growth, who is willing to tell you something you didn't want to hear. That's a resource most people never fully utilize because they're too busy defending themselves to actually listen. The Stoic approach to criticism involves a two-step process that most people skip entirely. Step 1. Understand yourself well enough that you have an internal reference point. When you know your values, your motivations, and the reasoning behind your choices, criticism hits differently. It doesn't vanish into the vacuum of a fragile self-concept and expand to fill all available space. You can hold it up against what you actually know to be true about yourself and assess it honestly. Step 2. Evaluate the criticism on its actual merits. Is there truth in it? Not all criticism is accurate. Some of it says more about the critic than the criticized, about their frustrations, their projections, their own unresolved material. You don't have to accept all of it as valid, but you also can't grow if you reflexively reject all of it. The Stoic practitioner develops the ability to extract what's useful and release what isn't, without drama in either direction. They don't collapse under harsh feedback. They also don't perform invulnerability. They simply engage with it thoughtfully, take what serves their growth, and move on. That's not coldness. That's maturity expressed as function. Epictetus said something that should be more famous than it is. It's not what happens to you, but how you think about it that disturbs you. This is one of the most practically important ideas in Stoic philosophy, and also one of the most counterintuitive, because when we feel offended, the offense feels so real, so immediate, so clearly caused by what the other person did. But the Stoics were pointing at something precise. Between the external event and your emotional response, there is always a layer of interpretation, a story your mind tells about what the event means. That story is not the event, it's your construction of the event, and constructions can be revised. This is not about denying that something hurt. It's about refusing to let the hurt become a permanent installation. The practical technique the Stoics used, what modern cognitive therapy has independently rediscovered, is reframing. When you feel offended, instead of immediately following the emotional charge, you pause and examine the story. What am I actually upset about? Is my interpretation of this event the only possible interpretation? What would change if I understood it differently? Empathy is an enormously useful tool here, not as soft sentiment, but as a cognitive act. When you genuinely try to understand what the other person might be carrying that caused them to act the way they did, the offense loses much of its heat. Not because they were right, not because you excuse what happened, but because you've placed their behavior in a human context rather than treating it as a direct verdict on your worth. And then there's forgiveness, which the Stoics understood not as a gift to the other person, but as an act of self-liberation. Holding on to offense is metabolically expensive. It costs you attention, energy, sleep, mental clarity. The person who offended you has likely moved on. You, meanwhile, are still paying rent on a grievance that isn't serving you. Forgiveness is releasing that. Not because the offense didn't happen, because continuing to pay that cost benefits no one, least of all you. Here is what fear and shame have in common. Both get significantly worse when you avoid them. Both tend to diminish substantially when you face them directly. This is not intuitive. Avoidance feels protective. But the Stoics understood, and modern psychology has confirmed, that what we refuse to examine tends to grow in the dark. Fear, at its core, is usually a response to the vague and undefined. When something feels threatening, but you haven't clearly articulated what specifically you're afraid of, the fear fills the available space and becomes enormous. The Stoic technique is to do the opposite of what fear wants, to move toward it, to examine it closely, to break it down into specific components. What exactly am I afraid of? What is the specific worst outcome I'm imagining? How likely is that outcome actually? And if it happened, how would I deal with it? That last question is crucial. Most fear is predicated on the assumption that the feared outcome would be unbearable. But when you examine that assumption honestly, you almost always find that you would handle it. You would adapt. You have before. The catastrophe you're dreading is survivable, and knowing that changes the texture of the fear. Shame operates similarly, but its roots run deeper. Shame is often tied to a core belief about your fundamental worth, that a mistake or failure reveals something disqualifying about who you are as a person. The Stoic correction is gentle but firm. Your mistakes are not you. They are experiences you've had. They contain information about what you did and what happened. They do not constitute a verdict on your value. The move toward both fear and shame is not recklessness. It's courage in its most practical form. The willingness to look at something uncomfortable without flinching, and to discover that you're stronger than the looking felt like it would require. The Stoics had a practice they called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of difficulties. And it sounds, on the surface, like deliberate pessimism. Why would you spend mental energy imagining things going wrong? But that's a misreading of what the practice actually does. Anticipating obstacles is not about expecting failure. It's about removing the element of surprise, which turns out to be one of the most significant contributors to how devastating any given difficulty feels. When something goes wrong that you genuinely never considered possible, you're hit with both the difficulty itself and the disorientation of your assumptions being violated. That combination is far more destabilizing than the difficulty alone. The Stoic practitioner, before a significant event or endeavor, asks, what could go wrong here? Not obsessively, not catastrophically, just honestly. What are the realistic challenges? What are the points of potential failure? And, crucially, how would I respond if those things happened? This mental rehearsal does something important. It pre-activates your problem-solving capacity. Instead of encountering an obstacle cold and having to improvise under stress, you've already done some thinking. You've already considered responses. When the difficulty arrives, you have a starting point. This is how experienced people in high-pressure environments maintain their composure when things go sideways. Not because they don't feel the pressure, but because their minds have already visited something like this territory. The surprise has been absorbed in advance. The practice also reveals something useful about your assumptions. When you map out potential obstacles honestly, you sometimes discover that your plan had gaps you hadn't noticed. Better to find those gaps in advance in the calm of reflection than to find them in the middle of the situation where you have the least capacity to think clearly. Anticipate, prepare, and face what comes with a mind that's already been there. When Epictetus said that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters, he was making a claim about where power actually lives. Not in the event, not in the external circumstance, in the quality of your response. Inner strength is often misunderstood as the absence of difficulty or the absence of emotion. It's neither. Inner strength is the capacity to feel the full weight of something difficult and still choose your response. to not be completely determined by your circumstances. This capacity is built, not inherited, and it's built through specific practices rather than through declaration. Self-awareness is the foundation. You cannot manage what you cannot see. The person who is regularly surprised by their own emotional reactions, who finds themselves having said or done something they regret and genuinely doesn't understand how they got there, is operating without visibility into their own interior. Self-awareness is the practice of developing that visibility, of knowing your triggers and your patterns and your tendencies before they've already produced their consequences. Resilience is the next layer, and resilience, contrary to what the word sometimes implies, is not the absence of being affected. It's the ability to return to your baseline after being affected. Every challenge you face is practice. Every time you navigate something difficult and come out the other side with your values and your character intact, you have deposited something in the account of resilience. That account compounds. Gratitude sounds soft but functions structurally. When you're genuinely focused on what you have rather than what you lack, your emotional baseline shifts. You're not performing positivity, you're training your attention toward a more accurate and more useful picture of your actual situation. The Stoics practice this daily and not by accident, and community matters. Stoicism is not an individualist philosophy despite how it's sometimes presented. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, expresses profound gratitude for specific teachers, friends, and mentors who shaped him. You are allowed to draw on others. In fact, the Stoics would say you're supposed to. There's a scene Marcus Aurelius describes as a thought experiment that has stayed relevant for 2,000 years. You're in traffic. Someone cuts you off. Your body generates a surge of adrenaline, your jaw tightens, and your hand moves toward the horn. Now, pause. In that moment, before the horn sounds, before the window rolls down, before the words form, what actually serves you? What does the action you're about to take accomplish? Does it resolve the situation or escalate it? Does it reflect who you intend to be? The Stoics were not arguing for passivity. They were arguing for intentionality. There is a crucial difference between choosing not to act impulsively and choosing not to act. One is wisdom, the other is avoidance. What they were after was the gap, the moment of conscious choice between impulse and action, where your values actually get to participate. This restraint is not about suppressing yourself. It's about choosing a better version of yourself than the one the impulse was going to produce. This principle extends far beyond traffic. It applies to every high-stakes conversation where the emotionally satisfying response is not the strategically wise one. To every moment of conflict where matching the other person's energy would escalate rather than resolve. To every impulsive decision made under stress that a day's reflection would have improved considerably. The practice of restraint is the practice of acting from your principles rather than your nervous system. Your nervous system is optimized for speed and survival, not for wisdom and long-term flourishing. Your principles are what you've worked out carefully and honestly about who you want to be and how you want to engage with the world. When the two conflict, the Stoics argue that your principles should win, not through suppression, through the deliberate practice discipline of creating enough space that the choice can actually happen. This is perhaps the most misunderstood Stoic principle, so let's be precise about what it does and doesn't mean. Acceptance, in the Stoic sense, is not agreement. It is not approval. It is not the resigned shrug of someone who has given up on changing things. It is something far more practical. The refusal to spend energy arguing with what has already happened. Here's the distinction that matters. If you've lost your job, there is a version of the next hour where you spend it in shock, in denial, cycling through frustration and disbelief at the fact that this happened. And there is a version where you accept, quickly, clearly, without drama, that this is the current reality and immediately ask, what can I do next? The first version is not more emotionally honest than the second. It's just less efficient. The situation is identical in both. The only difference is how much of your limited cognitive and emotional capacity you're spending on resistance to reality versus navigation of it. The Stoics observed that humans resist reality in proportion to how much they love their expectations of it. When the actual world diverges from the expected world, we often try to force the actual world back into the shape we wanted, through complaint, through repeated analysis of how unfair it is, through the emotional labor of non-acceptance, rather than updating our operating picture and working with what's actually there. Acceptance is the update. It's the recalibration of your map to match the territory, and it's the prerequisite for effective action, because you cannot navigate a situation you're refusing to see clearly. This doesn't mean you can't work to change things. Often you can and should. But working to change things from a place of clear acceptance is dramatically more effective than working to change them from a place of emotional resistance to the fact that they are what they are. Accept the reality, then decide what to do with it, in that order.
The 10th principle is, in some ways, the one all the others are in service of. Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca all return to this idea from different angles, that the good life, the genuinely fulfilling, sustainable, deeply satisfying life, requires living in accordance with your actual nature, rather than in performance of what the world around you expects. Your rational nature, the capacity to think, to evaluate, to choose, is not just one feature of who you are. For the Stoics, it's the defining one, and using it fully, honestly, consistently is what it means to live according to nature. In practice, this means several things. It means genuine self-knowledge, understanding your actual values, your real strengths and limitations, the things that matter to you beneath the noise of what you've been told should matter. This is harder than it sounds. We absorb so many external expectations, from family, from culture, from the systems we move through, that distinguishing what's genuinely ours from what we've inherited requires real examination. It means cultivating what the Stoics called the four virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, not as performance or social signaling, but as the actual quality of your choices and actions, in private as much as in public. The Stoic test of virtue was always the private moment, when nobody was watching and there was no external reward for doing the right thing. It means accepting the natural cycles of your life with something closer to grace than resistance. You will not always be at your peak. There will be seasons of difficulty, of transition, of loss. Living according to nature means recognizing these as features of human experience, rather than failures of your planning. And it means living in genuine relationship with other people, not as performance of sociability, but as authentic engagement with the fact that we are genuinely interdependent. The Stoics were not loners advocating for isolated self-sufficiency. They believed in friendship, in community, in the genuine mutual responsibility that comes with being human together. Your nature is your compass. Your virtue is your North Star. Live toward both, consistently, in the moments that don't seem to matter as much as the ones that do, because those are the moments that actually form your character. 10 principles, all of them pointing at the same fundamental claim. The quality of your life is not determined by what happens to you. It is determined by the quality of what you bring to what happens, the steadiness of your purpose, the clarity of your mind, the resilience of your character, and the depth of your commitment to living in alignment with your genuine values. The storm doesn't stop. Life will continue to deliver difficulty, uncertainty, and circumstances that didn't make it onto your preferred list of experiences. The Stoics weren't promising otherwise. What they were offering was something different, not a shield against the storm, but the development of a self solid enough that the storm, however fierce, never reaches the place where you actually live. That's not a destination. It's a practice. Daily, imperfect, absolutely worth it. Stay grounded. Keep building. See you in the next one.